love you. I love you in every universe.
No matter which Hoyoverse game you're playing, there's one thing that'll always be certain. That the game will have a badass Raiden electric deity of some kind. And they're usually one of, if not my favorite characters in each game. So I thought it would be fun to go over them in this video, talking about each export version of Raiden throughout the different games, go over their lore and backstories, because it really doesn't matter which Raiden you're talking about, they're all incredibly important to the story, they all have a major role to play in their games, and one thing is consistent, they're all incredibly strong, whether it be in lore or even through gameplay. So let's go over their lore and dive headfirst into the Raidenverse. And there's more to these characters, they're more intertwined than most people realize. They might all be different versions of the same character from different universes and different games, but they are all very deeply connected. And in order to better understand that, the order that I'm going to break down their lore and backstories is going to make sense once we get to the end. So first we're going to start with the version that's a little bit more disconnected than the other two. From Genshin Impact and Teyvat that's a little more isolated, the Raiden Shogun. Or her actual name Raiden Mei, who actually has a twin sister archon Raiden Makoto. The funny thing is, outside of a select few, not too many people knew that they were separate individuals, two sister electro gods, identical twins, but nobody knew this, except for a few trusted close friends of theirs that were powerful yokai. And honestly, Inazuma prospered because of this. Raiden Makoto was perfect at handling the nation's affairs, the more diplomatic and political side of being an archon and ruling over a nation. But Raiden Mei was the powerhouse of the two, acting as her sister's sword and enforcer. It's honestly hard to keep track of how many gods Raiden Mei has put into the dirt herself, but that was just the way of the world back then, especially during the Archon War, when all of the gods in each nation fought over a Gnosis to rule as an Archon for Celestia. And Inazuma was no different, only Raiden Makoto might have been the best candidate to be the Archon, but Raiden Mei was the one that put her there, slaying countless other gods that would challenge them. Ironically, nobody would even know that they're two different individuals, which is sort of funny. They just thought Raiden Makoto was the perfect Archon in both delegating and strength. But Raiden Mei was happy to do this for her sister, and they were very close. And the Nation of Eternity prospered for many years, until the Cataclysm, which happened 500 years before the game starts. The big catastrophe with Conria and the monsters that came rushing out of the abyss. The Cataclysm was a catastrophe that took place in every single region simultaneously. And this would be the beginning where Raiden Mei would truly experience PTSD, and that the only thing that separates the gods, even the most mighty archons, from actual mortals is really not that much. Gods experience PTSD, loss, anguish, all of these things. So let's break down what exactly happened. To backtrack a little bit, the Archon War lasted hundreds of years. It wasn't just a week-long event where gods slaughtered each other. It took hundreds of years before everything got established. Orobashi, the great serpent god, fled to the Dark Sea and ended up in Enkanomiya, and the people that were banished there worshipped Orobashi as their deity until Orobashi, towards the end of the Archon War, would bring the people of Enkanomiya back to the surface and form Watatsumi Island so they could live there in peace. But Orobashi was sentenced to death by Celestia for learning forbidden knowledge, reading the books before Sun and Moon, and learning hidden secrets. And because it was sentenced to death and did not wish death upon its own people, it went and attacked Yashiori Island and was ultimately slain by the Raiden Shogun, Raiden Mei, at the very end of the Archon War, leaving a huge gouge in this island where Orobashi's dead remains can be seen to this day, and the island now plagued with corruption of a dead god, corrupting the land and everyone that goes here. So now, the island isn't even inhabitable anymore. People go mad here. And because Orobashi was an expert and taught its people to smelt, which is a process related to mining, it's heavily speculated that Orobashi might be a god that Rex Lapis chased out of Chenyu Vale, being that smelting is a big thing there as well. But either way, because the Electro Archon killed Orobashi, the people of Watatsumi, refused to acknowledge the Electro Archon after killing its deity, and there would be lots of rebel wars between the people of Watatsumi and the rest of Inazuma. And these conflicts would be when the first friend of Raiden Ei would perish, a Tengu yokai and the ancestor of Kujo Sara. And then it wouldn't be till many years later when the cataclysm would hit Inazuma that her Oni friend, the ancestor of Arataki Ito, would be swallowed by an abyssal beast and corrupted, turning her evil, causing her to attack her own friend and nation, forcing the Raiden Shogun to slay her best friend, and then finally her Kitsune yokai friend, the ancestor of Yaimiko, would be the last to perish during the cataclysm. All three of her friends now gone, but this wouldn't be the last tragedy, as Raiden Makoto would join the other Archons in Sumeru to make a final stand against the cataclysm and Conria's mechas. During this huge catastrophe, 3 Archons perished. Ajiria the Hydro Archon, Rukadawada died saving Irminsul, and Raiden Makoto died as well, which would be the final death, her twin sister, that would truly send Raiden Ei over the edge. But no one would ever know because not many people knew the truth, that there was actually 2 twin sister Archons. Yaimiko would be born sometime after the cataclysm, and would ultimately befriend Raiden Ei and be her closest confidant, helping her run the nation's affairs because Raiden Ei was not suited for this task. She was a warrior, a fighter, not a ruler, so Yaimiko took most of that burden as well as her gnosis, and Raiden Ei, in her anguish and grief, fearing Celestia, the Heavenly Principle's wrath and eternity, often hid in the plane of Euthymia, avoiding her responsibilities. But before she did this, she would create a puppet that could hold a gnosis, could stand in her place and run the nation's affairs. Scaramouche was the first prototype, but was then discarded. She would finally perfect her design before officially retiring to the plane of Euthymia, allowing her puppet to rule in her stead. Only this puppet and its ideal programming of eternity was flawed, becoming a tyrannical ruler and dictator, confiscating visions and anything that could threaten eternity. If you did not oblige, you were met with the Muso no Hiranatachi, and Yaimiko being the one person that most people now turn to. And this is ultimately the situation that we're left when we first step foot in Inazuma, where visions are being confiscated and the traveler has to overcome obstacles in order to free the nation and help snap Raiden Ei out of her funk. With the assistance of Yaimiko and many other companions in Inazuma, we are able to do this, Kazuha even being able to stop her blade point blank with his own 2 hands. Because Raiden Ei neglected her duties for so long and hiding away, the Fatui had an easy time manipulating the events in Inazuma with the distribution of delusions and just orchestrating the catastrophe and the current state of the nation. Eventually, the traveler with Yaimiko's help was able to inspire and change the mind of Raiden Ei, helping her come to terms with the reality that we are in. And although she fears the heavenly principles and just wants to abide by the laws in order to avoid their wrath, witnessing what happened to Conria, Inazuma eventually turns a new leaf and Raiden Ei comes out of the plane of Euthymia and out of hiding. However, the Shogun puppet that she herself created would be a problem, and they would have to duke it out for 500 long years in another plane, hidden under the sacred Sakura, the same sacred Sakura tree that Ei used during the cataclysm to help destroy the monsters and the corruption in Inazuma and the ley line. Raiden Makoto, however, after her death, placed some of her consciousness in the shrine and the great tree. And after defeating the Shogun puppet in a great duel that lasted 500 years, Makoto's consciousness spawned from the tree and apologized to her sister for leaving her so suddenly during the cataclysm. And before Raiden Makoto's consciousness finally faded away for good, she handed Raiden Ei a seed of the sacred Sakura. Ei believing that Istaroth was involved with Makoto in some way and involved in the creation of the sacred Sakura. And without her intervention, Inazuma would have ultimately been consumed by the darkness and the abyss. So in its own weird way, the same sacred Sakura tree and seed that Raiden Ei used to help protect Inazuma was ultimately always protected by the less combative and powerful Raiden Makoto all along, even through time, and now can plant the seed of the sacred Sakura under the great shrine, in the future so that it will ultimately help them in the past. Raiden Makoto playing 4D chess here to help her nation and her sister, even from death in the future. And this is how the sacred Sakura would even form to begin with. Now Raiden A in present day strives to do better, regain the trust of its citizens and the yokai that live in Inazuma. Many years of tyranny have tarnished a lot of people's faith in the Electro Archon, but they're coming around. And Raiden A is ready when the final war comes against Celestia. Our sibling has recently told us that the heavenly principles will awaken soon, and Raiden A pretty recently already mentions that she's ready, and Inazuma will be ready for when the final war and the Great War begins. Raiden A is the perfect example of a god that has such human qualities, and that even though an all-knowing archon and deity is supposed to be just that, a deity in the eyes of a mortal, they really do have so many human qualities, and they suffer just like we do when they lose someone they love. One of the biggest failures of the Raiden Shogun, in my opinion, is the creation of Scaramouche, allowing him to be manipulated and experimented on by the Fatui, the countless people he's murdered in his grief, trying to find purpose in this world, and ultimately kind of passing the buck to another Archon to correct and fix your mistakes, trying to rehabilitate the Wanderer. A result of her own neglect and PTSD, but she is on the right track now. And fun fact, Raiden A and Scaramouche, now known as the Wanderer, represent and are based off of the Japanese gods Raijin and Fujin, who are the gods of thunder and wind. And because Inazuma is also based off Japan, it just makes sense. You can even see the little circles they have on their backs when they activate their skill are the same as the gods of wind and thunder have in ancient Japanese mythology. And now that's going to wrap up the Raiden Shogun, but there is definitely some key things about the Raiden Shogun that we need to remember. Talking about the next two versions of this character, you're going to understand once we break them down and see some similarities between these three. The next one to talk about in chronological order to make the most sense is Mei or Raiden Mei from Honkai Impact 3rd, and technically the original of the three. Obviously we know that Honkai Impact 3rd and the Honkai Impact games are very convoluted with its lore, its story, so if I were to break down her backstory in great detail, unless you've played the games and are a veteran of those games and understand the lore, most of what I say won't make any sense at all. So I'm going to simplify it in a way and stick to the meat and potatoes. But before we can go over the character, we need to understand different concepts of the Honkai Impact games. Starting with, well, the Honkai. What is that exactly? The Honkai is a mysterious, life-threatening phenomenon that comes in the form of natural disasters. You could almost call it like natural selection if you want. Radiation, disasters, beasts, monsters, zombies, calamities of any kind. Designed to wipe out civilization. Only the Honkai is a little bit more complex than that. You see, the Honkai Impact games explore the multiverse, vast different timelines and worlds. It gets pretty deep. All you need to really know though is the multiverse is connected through the imaginary tree, the different branches and timelines, and the Sea of Quanta that houses a bunch of multiverse and bubble universes. We could go down the rabbit hole for hours, even if Teyvat and Genshin or Honkai Star Rail is one of these bubble universes, a different timeline. We don't really know for sure. But the Honkai is an energy or almost a purging system from the imaginary tree and does exactly what I just described. Now, in these games there are individuals throughout the timelines and throughout history that are referred to and called Herrschers, which is a German word for a sovereign, deity, or very immensely powerful individual. And these individuals have a connection with the Honkai. It obviously makes them immensely powerful, but it can also corrupt them as well. Some individuals are able to control their Herrscher powers, while others usually get consumed and controlled by the Honkai through this energy. Humans have been merging with the Honkai energy for centuries and millennia. It's the will of the Honkai, the natural selection, to destroy the current era of human civilization. A good example of this is Welt Yang from Honkai Impact 3rd, who actually physically jumped over from game to game to Honkai Star Rail. He's not actually from Honkai Star Rail, he is in the wrong game. But he was also a former Herrscher, just to put into perspective. But throughout the timelines, Raiden Mei was born on April 13th, 1997. in Japan, because the Honkai games take place in our own real world. It's funny that Raiden Shogun is the archon of a Japanese-themed nation in Teyvat, and this Raiden was actually physically born in Japan, her parents being CEOs of a big corporation and electronics company. But when she was young, she was kidnapped by some terrorist organization, and they did Honkai-related experiments with her. Then her father was set up and arrested due to fraud and criminal activities, but he was basically set up by Cocolia. The Honkai Impact veterans knew the minute we stepped foot in Belobog that Cocolia was going to be a huge bitch in this game too, and they weren't wrong. She was. So basically, Mei at this point had been experimented on by terrorists with Honkai-related experiments. Her father got arrested, and her family's assets were seized due to her father's criminal activities. So this caused her to be cold and distant towards others. But she would meet a young girl in high school named Kiana Kazlana, who would be the main MC in Honkai Impact 3rd, and they would form a close bond that would actually grow into a genuine relationship. Saying that Raiden Mei became obsessed with Kiana might be a little bit exaggerated, but it gave her new purpose and meaning. Everything that she is and everything that she did was for Kiana, and it made her come around and grow a more gentle side after being so cold and distant. But then there was an outbreak of the Honkai in Raiden Mei's home city, and with those experiments, it caused her to become the Herster of Thunder. Only the Honkai possessed and controlled her, and she wreaked havoc on the city. Kiana would also have to become a Herster to stop her, and Raiden Mei was mortified at what she had done and the destruction she had caused, never wanting to transform again. They both joined an organization named Shixel, an organization devoted to Honkai research and preventing calamities, to also help learn to control her power. Raiden Mei even requested Himeko kill her, and Himeko laughed and gave her a smack, jokingly, saying that she should value her life a lot more. So they settled on planting a bomb close to her heart in case she transformed and it would detonate. Crazy, imagine living your life with a bomb next to your heart the entire time in case you transform. But she really didn't want to hurt anyone again, and have the Honkai control her like that. Some time would pass and they would both join the Academy St. Freya to become Valkyries along with their other friend Branya Zaechek. Mei often took the role of caretaker. It gave her meaning and she loved taking care of her friend Kiana. And over time, her Herster personality became kinder and more controllable, even being willing to also help protect Kiana. And in their time in the academy, they even had a teacher named Welt Yang, who we know also from Honkai Star Rail and Impact 3rd. We'll get to it in a second, but this also gives more meaning to the conversation that Acheron has with Welt in Penacony. Now, to make a long story short, the study and combat of the Honkai, humanity has created 3 main factions, each with different goals. First was Shixal, where the original 3 girls were from, which was an organization that was eventually under the corrupted control of Auto Apocalypse, a guy that Welt had to deal with. It's a whole thing. And this organization employed the use of Valkyries, or girl warriors equipped with battle suits who can combat the Honkai. They were all in the academy training together for this. The second main group was Anti and Trophy, headed by former Herrscher of Reason Welt Yang. Again, we all know Welt. He no longer holds that title, but he did at the time. And he helped spearhead using technology to fight against the Honkai. Finally, there was a group known as World Serpent, headed by Kevin Kazlana. Again, also mentioned by Acheron and Welt during their conversation. And Kevin desired an all-out Honkai extinction. Raiden Mei would join World Serpent for a while in order to help protect Kiana, but she would have to be pretty cold and almost disown her in order to join. And this would cause her and Kiana to have a bit of a falling out, but it was necessary in Raiden Mei's eyes to protect her. One of those old cliches where you have to disown and kind of pretend like you now hate the person you love most. Essentially, she joined this organization to protect Kiana and acted incredibly cold, and almost like her personality changed. She no longer cared for her, but really she was doing this to protect her. And the Honkai Impact 3rd finality focuses on Kevin's plan to finally initiate Project Stigma, a diabolical plan to release the Honkai energy throughout the world in hopes that even just 1% of humanity may develop a resistance to the Honkai, while letting the other 99% turn into zombies and just straight up die. But afterwards, humanity would more or less be immune to the Honkai, and thus eliminating the threat altogether. So Kiana, Mei, and Bronya went to the cocoon of finality, the origin of the Honkai itself. Finality meaning an irreversible ending. Essentially, Kiana defeats Kevin in a one-on-one battle, and thus finally becoming the Herrscher of Finality herself, while Raiden Mei actually becomes the Herrscher of Origin. This battle also took place on the moon, and then Kiana decided to stay on the moon and watch over the world to help heal it from the devastating effects of Kevin's project. Raiden Mei then would shed her title of Herrscher and become a captain of Schicksal, helping deal with the residual Honkai energy, and that is kind of where we're left in Honkai Impact, in regards to Raiden Mei. But to summarize, she was a girl, had rich CEO parents. They got arrested, her life fell apart, but she found solace in this friend and would be her love interest, Kiana. It's the one thing she cared about the most, and although she's done some pretty heinous and terrible things, she was always good-natured by heart. The difference between the main MC Kiana and Raiden Mei though was, Kiana wanted to help everyone and would do anything to help anyone, whereas Raiden Mei would do anything for Kiana. That is the main difference. And although Raiden Mei had many hardships throughout the Honkai Impact storyline and had some falling outs with Kiana, they even fought, ultimately her ending was pretty satisfying and a relatively happy one. But that is the interesting parallel that I can already draw between the Raiden Shogun and Raiden Mei from Honkai Impact 3rd. Raiden A lost her twin sister during the Cataclysm. She loved her twin sister more than anyone, and the death of her sister is what caused the downfall of Inazuma. The Raiden Shogun became a tyrant, neglected her duties and shut herself away. Her sister was the light in the dark for her, and to this day, even though we pretty much solved Inazuma's problems at this point, she still struggles with this, which is why she leans on Yaimiko so much. In Honkai Impact, it's more or less the same thing. Kiana was always there, and was the light in the dark. When her family lost everything, when she became a Herrscher of Thunder and destroyed her home city, and all of the things she had done throughout the timeline and the story. Again, it's very convoluted because of how long and stretched out her backstory could be, but she would be willing to do anything to protect her best friend and her love interest, Kiana. She would do terrible things, which makes her flawed but also relatable, and for the most part, she got a pretty happy ending. Both the Raiden Shogun and Raiden Mei from Honkai Impact 3rd, both of them got their own, I guess, happy ending-ish, in a way. Both driven from the same thing, the person they love most, for better or worse. Both characters having villainous traits and villainous arcs, but also viewed as heroes, and, for the most part, a good character. But that's where the interesting parallel stops, because when talking about Acheron or Raiden Mei from Honkai Star Rail, it gets so much more interesting. Because that is exactly what Acheron lacks. Because Acheron shouldn't even exist, and if I could sum up Acheron in one word, it would be anomaly. She is more or less a glitch in the system or the game. Even the Genius Society and the smartest people in Honkai Star Rail do not understand and can't wrap their head around why Acheron should even exist. An emanator of the Aeon IX, of nihility. It should be impossible, but yet here we are. And Acheron might just be the strongest character that's not an actual Aeon in Honkai Star Rail. By now, I'm sure most of you are familiar with Aeons, Emanators, and Pathstriders. A Pathstrider can draw the power of an Aeon, whereas an Emanator is granted specific permission from an Aeon directly and given immense powers. Every Aeon is different, but Aeons are like a metaphysical path or ideal, manifested into a deity or god or greater being in the universe. And there are Emanators of each Aeon, but Nihility should not even have an Emanator. And in contrast, an Emanator in Honkai Star Rail is kind of a parallel to an Archon in Genshin Impact or a Herrscher in Honkai Impact 3rd. But it gets so much deeper because Nihility means literally non-existent or nothingness. An IX of Nihility is a black hole Aeon, a black hole being a place in space where gravity pulls so much that even light cannot get out. A black hole in itself is kind of like Acheron, an anomaly. region of space-time where gravity is so strong nothing, not even light, can get out. It's all-consuming, endless nothingness. Almost like infinity, really. Almost like a gaping rift in space and time. And IX, the Eon, believed that life in everything is meaningless, everything is worthless, really embodying nihility. But IX, the Eon, also doesn't interact with anyone or anything, mortals, other Eons, other gods, other anything. It does not interact. So that is why in-game, nobody can understand why Acheron would be able to be an emanator, because an Eon has to gift you that power. But obviously the point of even bringing that up is obviously there are different circumstances that you can become an emanator, hence making her an anomaly. Now Acheron comes from a planet called Izumo that orbits a black sun. The black sun said to be the shadow of IX itself, whereas there's another sister planet orbiting that same black sun called Takamagara that are home to beasts known as Kame. Kame being a word used to describe gods, deities, or greater omnipotent beings in Japanese mythology. And these horned devilish beasts attack and destroy Izumo and its inhabitants, all of the humans living on Acheron's home planet. It's not really stated why they attacked all of a sudden, but maybe as the encroachment of nihility in the black sun they orbited maybe affect the Kame first, and really the nihility got to them. But all of the humans on our home world were more or less slaughtered, only a handful of them left, but they were able to kill a couple of these Kame, and they used the bodies of these gods to form weapons. And then the strongest Kame among them is the same body that was used to form Acheron's sword. We're gonna come back to that in a second, but essentially, when all of the fighting was said and done, Acheron, or Raiden Mei, was the only one left, as nihility encroached even further and the black sun started to consume both planets. So Acheron lunged to face nihility head on. Now here's where the parallels get interesting. Did Acheron fully embrace nihility through these events, allowing her to naturally tap into the emanator's power of this Eon, even without its permission? Or was it the loss of her version of Kiana or Raiden Makoto? Because we don't know of Acheron having that same parallel version of the person she cares about most. So I speculate that the version of this person she cared about most either perished during the Kami War, or what's even more devastating, that this universe version of Raiden Mei never even had a Kiana or a Raiden Makoto. And all of this considered really does make her the perfect candidate to reach full nihility, in turn making her an emanator with limitless power and potential. Because if IX doesn't pay attention to you, but yet you're able to become an emanator, and it's the Eon of endless nothingness and a giant black hole, perhaps Acheron can draw infinite power from this Eon, seen as that it's probably not regulating her power. And even though the smartest people in Honkai Star Rail can't figure out how she's an emanator, perhaps Acheron lacking her version's Kiana or Raiden Makoto really does qualify her to be this universe's version of true nihility and despair, making her the perfect self-annihilator. Self-annihilators being individuals who have accidentally stepped into IX's shadow, and from that moment lost their reason for existence. Only, I would say Acheron purposely stepped into IX's shadow when she lunged at it with her sword, a sword made from a god. And she really is the parallel universe version of these characters that really doesn't have somebody to depend on, that she loves deeply and cares about most. And what makes her even more dangerous and powerful is she sort of revels in it. She sort of embraced IX. So did this Eon ultimately decide to change its ways and grant her the power of Emanator? I don't think so, because Eons aren't emotional, they're metaphysical paths. For better or worse, they fully embody what they represent wholeheartedly. That is the point of the Eon. Eons are not benevolent. Even if their path represents mostly good or helps people, they don't do it for that. They just do it because they do it because that's what they are. So I don't think IX would just decide to make an emanator out of one individual, but rather I think she fully just embraced the IX when she stepped into its shadow. which in turn perhaps allows her to tap into a limitless power. But I find it also interesting that even the Raiden Shogun, when she goes into the plane of Euthymia, it's sort of symbolic towards this as well, because you can see an endless black sun and shadow even in the plane of Euthymia, suggesting that all of these versions perhaps feel the nihility through their own grief in each circumstance within each game. Like how Raiden Mei hid in the plane of Euthymia after her sister's death while her nation decayed outside, eventually coming to terms with things, and now is on the right path. Raiden Mei having Kiana to pick her up in her most darkest moments, despite her flaws and all of the bad things she's done. But Acheron is kind of like the version of Peter Parker where everyone you loved and cared about died, and you're alone in infinite nihility. What also makes her conversation with Welt even more interesting, now knowing what we know, is that Welt actually helped train and was a teacher and mentor to Raiden Mei and Honkai Impact 3rd, and Acheron, being somewhat aware of this, even states that the person you knew is me, but a different universe version of me. And then Welt mentions his friend Kevin Kazlana, who we know Raiden Mei helped Kiana and Branya defeat at the end of Honkai Impact 3rd. Another interesting parallel is that Acheron even notes Welt's weapon as another black hole, because Welt's cane is a divine key that he's carrying around. Divine keys in Honkai Impact 3rd are immensely powerful weapons crafted from the dead remains of a Herrscher, which are considered gods in Honkai Impact 3rd. And Acheron's carrying around a sword crafted from the dead remains of a Kame, also godlike deities in Honkai Star Rail. You know, it really puts into perspective how much of an anomaly and pain in the ass Acheron would have been to have in Penacony. The Watchmaker has Nameless, Stonehearts, Memo Keepers, a bunch of different powerful individuals from all different factions throughout Honkai Star Rail, and he was fully prepared for this in the rebirth of the Eon of Order, or a new embryo of that path. But Acheron was not supposed to be in Penacony, and really, when you think about it, how can you defeat somebody like Acheron? The dreamscape and the mind control doesn't work on her. How can you defeat endless nothingness, non-existence? It's impossible. So the Watchmaker politely asks Acheron to leave so he can complete his villainous quest. If it wasn't for Acheron crashing the party in Penacony, we don't really know what would have happened. That jerk Sunday might have control over everyone. And even Black Swan trying to take a peek into endless nihility didn't bode so well for her. Memo Keepers being literal emanators designed to record all events in human history throughout the universe, so that if the universe is destroyed someday, they can preserve the memories, but not when it comes to nihility. I often wonder as well if Acheron is self-aware that she is almost more or less the more depressing version of herself. That there are other universe export characters of her in other games and worlds, stories that have much happier endings or circumstances, which would also make her that much more of a candidate of nihility, because it almost seems like she is aware of this. Seen as that she's not surprised in the slightest when Welt, somebody not from Honkai Star Rail, recognizes her as somebody he recognizes and knows. And I'm also interested to learn more about the extent of her powers. Is she able to manipulate time itself? The fabric of reality in the universe? I am very curious to learn more about this. This I do not have the answers to, but let me know what you think down in the comments. And even though Acheron is now the true embodiment of nothing, meaningless, endless nihility, she still tries to help other self-annihilators, people who accidentally stepped into IX's shadow, and helps release them from that curse, as we saw her do before she went to Penacony with one of the Nameless and his companions that were corrupted. To try to put a gauge on Acheron's abilities and powers is kind of impossible, because it's hard to really gauge exactly the extent of it. But we know in Penacony, with ease, she was able to slice a rift through dream and reality, and that rift can be seen there to this day. But Acheron has sort of taken a liking and a fondness towards our main MC in Honkai Star Rail. So is this the game and universe where we, the main player, will actually be Acheron or Raiden Mei's version of Kiana or Raiden Makoto? Will we eventually be the reason that Acheron can step out of the shadow of IX for good? Or is that just Acheron's purpose in this parallel universe? Is she the universe version that doesn't have that and will always represent true nihility? I guess only time will tell. But I do hope you enjoyed the video. There is a reason that these characters are all incredibly significant within their own games. They all have similar parallels. I mean, you could say that, or you could say that they're the most popular marketable character. So Hoyoverse reuses the same character with a different coat of paint, a bit of a different story, so they can sell it again in a different game. I mean, you could look at it like that, but I like to look at it more that there's a deep connection here between the three, which really there is. But again, let me know your thoughts in the comments. Like and subscribe if you'd like to see more content like this, and as always, we will see you all in the next one. Later.